In the heart of London, England, is the Royal Banqueting House, where King Charles I hosted special receptions and performances in the mid-1600s. If you were to stand in this hall and gaze up at the ceiling, you would see an enormous 2,400 square foot series of oil paintings, collectively titled Glorification of King James I. In 1629, Peter Paul Rubens was commissioned to paint this massive work, which he accomplished with a crew of assistants over a period of 5 years. The sheer scale of a project this size is so impressive. It's hard to ignore the impact of size in this case. But even on a smaller scale, a painting's size, scale, and orientation can still have a big impact. And throughout history, artists have used each of these to influence how the viewer takes in the scene. As far back as the ancient civilizations, we see all kinds of painting sizes and orientations. Paintings even then could be extremely large, since fresco or mosaic paintings were only limited by the size of the wall being painted. Fresco was essentially watercolor on plaster. But there were also floor mosaics, wood panel paintings, as well as mythical and natural landscapes. We even see naturalistic landscapes at the time of the ancient Greeks. This fresco, for example, dates all the way back to the Bronze Age. After the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century, society rejected humanistic and nature-oriented themes, and instead was increasingly influenced by Byzantine Christian themes. You would still see large mosaics and fresco paintings, but free-hanging easel paintings were becoming popular, painted primarily on wood panel and using egg tempera paint. This naturally meant smaller paintings, since solid wood tends to be very heavy, and egg tempera is tricky to apply, quick drying in multiple layers. This time period was the Middle Ages, and small, faith-based devotional pieces were in demand. Much of the artwork was in the form of icon paintings, mostly in vertical format, and altarpieces in decorative triptych. Slowly, frescoes and mosaics took a back seat to the smaller, portable easel paintings. As society got deeper into the Renaissance, generally speaking, painting sizes increased as a result of the broadening subject matter, the use of oil paint and its ease of application, and eventually the introduction of canvas as a painting surface. Canvas fabric stretched over wooden bars was a lot lighter than solid wood panel, so large easel paintings became more feasible. The use of canvas grew in popularity throughout the 15 and 1600s. It was initially popularized in Venice, Italy, but soon spread into Spain, and then into the rest of Western Europe. Eventually, by the mid-1600s, canvas would overtake wood panel as the surface of choice, especially for larger work. In the 16 and 1700s, the demand for painting increased as society on a whole got wealthier and more people wanted to decorate their homes. This was especially true in Dutch homes at this time, where it's said that even the poorest households hung up to 10 paintings. The growing market encouraged the trend to paint scenes from daily life as well as landscapes, and to offer paintings in smaller formats, making them more affordable for more levels of society. Now, up to this point, we've taken a general look at the progression of painting size. But no matter what the current artistic trends, artists have always found ways to paint large. In ancient times, as we said, fresco and mosaic paintings could be as large as an entire room. In the Middle Ages, even though solid wood panel was usually painted in a smaller format, large paintings could be achieved simply by gluing several boards together. That's true in later periods as well. The downside was that the larger you painted, the thicker the panel needed to be for stability, and the heavier the piece. To the point where, as we see in the case of the Portinari altarpiece, it took the strength of 16 men to move it. Through the 1600s, when painting on canvas, you were only limited by the size of the weaver's loom. But Even then, you could sew multiple pieces together to produce a larger surface. Still, a single sheet of canvas would be preferred. So in 1733, when the flying shuttle was invented, it sped up the weaving process and enabled larger and larger looms, which meant larger and larger single canvas paintings. By the 1830s, a manufacturer could create a single canvas sheet as wide as 8 to 20 feet. As the demand for painting increased, standardization of painting sizes was a natural byproduct. Artists, panel suppliers, and framers would all benefit from the repeat production of specific or popular surface sizes. Suppliers could create batches ahead of time, and artists could more easily and more affordably order what they need. Back in the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, there was actually a degree of standardization when it came to surface size. But this was usually restricted to either the individual wood panel maker or guild, or to the specific town where the surface was made. There were no countrywide or society-wide standards. Broader standardization began to be seen in the late 1600s, but even then, sizes usually varied slightly between countries. Standards were usually based around portrait work, especially in England, meaning that size ratios were more squared. British sizes were typically named by how much of the body would be painted, such as the head, also called the head and shoulders portrait, 3/4, which was later called half-length, which was later called 3/4, and full length, which showed the whole body. In France, standards were less squared, and they developed a clever numerical system that's still used today. The numbers originally came from the cost of the stretched fabric for each size. One dimension, or size, would be the same for each genre, and the second would determine the overall size, loosely based on the golden ratio. In the Netherlands, panel sizes were initially regulated in 1617 by the Antwerp Guild of St. Luke. At that time, they listed 5 initial sizes based on the coinage of the day. Frans Hals, a Dutch artist who worked around that time, had a major impact on portraiture and was known to often use standard panel sizes purchased from his local guild for his portraits. In his case, many were single-panel surfaces. Standardization very likely increased both his output and saved him some money. By the mid-1700s, the number of standard sizes across Europe had greatly increased, with France listing approximately 16 common canvas sizes. Around this time, landscape painting slowly became accepted as a proper painting genre across much of Europe, and was considered prestigious by the late 1700s. Initially, artists simply turned the standard portrait orientation on its side and painted horizontally. But eventually, as demand for landscape increased, wider orientations joined the standardized list. In fact, it's suggested that popular landscape sizes came into being as leading artists repeatedly used a specific painting size. J.M.W. Turner, for example, had canvases specially made for his landscapes. Eventually, other artists came to adopt his 36 by 48 canvas size, so suppliers adapted to meet the need. Throughout the 1800s, landscape would take off, becoming one of the most dominant genres in society. Now that we have an understanding of the development of surface size, standardization, and orientation, let's get a better understanding of how it applies to us today. First, let's define these terms as they apply to this video. Size is how physically large a painting is, or how big the canvas is. Paintings can be enormous, taking up an entire wall or even the side of a building. They can be a standard medium size, 9 by 12, all the way up to 24 by 36, or they can be very small, perhaps 5 by 7 or 8 by 10, even miniature, for which there's an entire category of painting. These tiny paintings are often 4 by 6 inches framed or smaller. Scale refers to how a scene or an object appears as compared to real life. Objects or scenes can be scaled up to appear larger than life, or scaled down to appear minute. And lastly, there's orientation, which refers to how a painting is situated, whether horizontally, vertically, or perhaps squared. There are varying degrees of orientation. Some paintings are extremely narrow horizontally, while others are very narrow vertically. And all of these factors come into play when viewing a painting, whether we realize it or not. But let's take a closer look at each. When planning a painting, an artist takes into consideration the overall size of the product they want to paint. This decision is sometimes simply a matter of what materials they have on hand, or how big they feel like painting. But other times, the size is selected intentionally to enhance their objective. An artist may decide to paint in large format if they want people to feel like they're in the scene, to be immersed in what the artist sees. I recently painted a tree sitting in a wide valley, and I wanted to communicate the feeling of expanse. So I knew it had to be painted larger in order to take up more of the viewer's visual space. Larger formats are helpful if you want to communicate importance, breadth, or grandeur. But painting large does have its drawbacks. It takes more time, more effort, more paint, and more money to paint that size. The finished product is heavier and more expensive to frame, and it's more difficult to transport. It also requires a large workspace, so it's not for everyone, but it does have impact. Now, some may think that painting large means working with less detail, but we see a lot of detail in large and even massive works by the masters, especially history and landscape paintings. However, keep in mind that when they do add detail, they don't include every single item in view, just those that are important. They take out unnecessary information. Not every artist has the patience, time, or funds to paint in that size. Some people prefer to work small. Small paintings often have just as much detail or even more as a medium or large painting. The difference is that a small painting will use smaller brushes, smaller brush movements, and less paint. Small paintings tend to be less about emotion and impact and more about detail or highlighting a specific object or aspect of a scene. In a smaller format, landscapes often include more value contrast in order to draw the eye. A large painting is impactful even when it uses less dramatic values, but a small painting will need to find a way to catch the viewer's eye, so using value contrast or additional detail can be important. As Ernest Missonnier, a French artist from the 1800s who was known for working in miniature, puts it, quote, "The smaller the scale of one's picture, the more boldly the relief must be brought out. The larger the scale, the more it must be softened and diminished. This is an absolutely indispensable rule. A life-size figure treated like one of my small ones would be unendurable." A medium-sized canvas is the happy in-between. It'll fit in people's homes, still have impact, still have detail, doesn't cost a fortune, and doesn't take up too much room. It also doesn't disappear visually, as a miniature piece could. This is why I would suggest medium-sized paintings are especially popular. Interestingly, there's a phenomenon that occurs when it comes to painting size. When we see a painting in a book or on a website, our mind assumes the size of the piece. We don't often consciously think about how large or small it is. We just take in the scene. But when we see the piece in person, it's often not what the brain assumed, and can be a shocking experience. This was the case for me when I saw the history painting Washington Crossing the Delaware. I had seen it all my life in books and never thought about the true size. I guess I assumed it was perhaps a 24 by 36. In reality, it was over 12 feet by 21 feet. It was astonishing. I've also experienced the reverse, and it relates to a sculpture in this case. Years ago, we took a trip to Bruges, Belgium. I was excited to see Michelangelo's sculpture, The Madonna of Bruges, as it was housed in that city. I had seen images, and again, my brain assumed the size. So I was surprised to see that it was only 4 feet high in person. I imagined it more like 8 feet high. So in this case, I was a little disappointed. Once I got over the size difference, I was able to appreciate the beauty and the artistry. Artists also consider scale when planning a painting. The word scale is sometimes confusingly referred to as size. A large-scale painting, for example, refers to the physical size. But in this video, we're referring to scale as the size of something in relation to reality, how objects or scenes appear in relation to what you see in nature. Let's do a comparison. When using size in a painting, if I was going to paint a coffee cup sitting on a table, I could either paint it life-size on a small canvas, or I could use a much larger canvas and encompass the cup, the table, and the background. The size of the canvas changed, but the cup remained life-size. When using scale for the same scene, I would select a medium-sized canvas and either scale up the cup by visually zooming in and painting a close-up image of it, perhaps focusing on the cup's texture, or I could zoom out and make the cup smaller than life-size, together with the objects next to it. Changing the scale of an object or scene can change how viewers perceive the piece. We expect to see things as we see them in nature. When it's out of natural scale, it can add visual interest and make it unique. Landscapes of nature are usually scaled down. After all, it would be impossible to paint a mountain to size. But artists do paint them sized to what they see from their perspective, as if looking out a window, for example. So in that sense, they are in scale. Masters from the past would scale individual elements within a painting to impact the piece. For example, artists from the Hudson River School would sometimes upscale the mountains in a landscape in order to increase the drama in the scene. Portrait painters would sometimes paint a figure larger than life, giving the viewer the feeling that the individual was one of importance. Or they may increase the size of the head, or maybe the hand, as we see in the statue of David. Scholars still debate why Michelangelo made those proportion changes. More contemporary artist Georgia O'Keeffe painted very scaled paintings of flowers, so scaled, in fact, as to make them almost abstract. Strategically shrinking or enlarging areas of a painting can change how the entire painting comes across to the viewer. Are there limits to how large or small a scale can be? I think so. A figure painting that's too large could cross over into feeling frightening or overwhelming. It would certainly lose a relational feeling. And one that's too small would no longer be able to fully communicate the sitter's personality, because the viewer wouldn't be able to fully gauge the expression or sense the personality. Important details would be omitted or too small to really see. There are examples in other genres too. A still life that is too large would likely feel odd, uncomfortable, unless it was handled right. But then, that could be the artist's intent. And imagine the Washington Crossing painting if it was only an 11 by 14. It would not have the same impact or importance. Another tool artists use when it comes to the physical presentation of artwork is the painting's orientation, whether it's situated horizontally, vertically, or square. A typical painting surface is rectangular, and how tall or wide a surface is will help determine how the composition will convey to the viewer. Painting surfaces can also take the form of a circle, an oblong, or other creative shapes, but rectangular is by far the most common form. Standard painting canvases are set according to an aspect ratio, which is simply how the width compares to the height. Canvases are organized by aspect ratio, so those with the same related width and height are in the same grouping. They're scaled versions of one another. For example, a standard canvas of 18 by 24 inches has an aspect ratio of 3 to 4. A 12 by 16 has the same aspect ratio, meaning that both the 12 and the 18 are just upscaled versions of 3. If we picture it visually, each side can be broken up into equally sized segments, 3 on the short side and 4 on the long. A 16 by 20, on the other hand, has an aspect ratio of 4 to 5. It's a little more square than the other two, and would have its own set of similarly scaled sizes. You'll notice that some sizes are wider or taller than others. You can go from a square with even sides to one that's wider, to one that's even wider still, all the way up to what would be a panoramic orientation. And these can all be turned on their side to sit vertically. In Asian art, they're very often painted not only vertically, but very vertically. That orientation offers them a unique perspective and an opportunity to incorporate areas of white space, which Asian painters often consider as important as the subject itself. As for portraiture, the human body is oriented vertically, so a vertical canvas naturally works well. In a landscape with a wide horizon line and breadth of view is a natural fit for a horizontal or panoramic orientation. Is it wrong to paint a portrait on a horizontal orientation? Or a landscape on a vertical? Not at all. It's art. You just need to finesse the composition in order to fit other orientations. Other genres such as abstracts, still life, and florals can more easily fit into any orientation. The banqueting hall ceiling by Rubens is a great example of large format painting in a variety of orientations. When he completed the works and shipped them for installation, installers discovered that they were too large for the space. Standard measures between the two countries were slightly different, so the canvases had to be trimmed. Once installed, the result was magnificent, and today it's the only ceiling work by Rubens in its original location.